Welcome to everybody who signed in to I think this is the 17th of 21 sessions of the Spring Gathering for Gardener Celebration of Mind. And tonight's session is presented by Professor Craig Kaplan. And it's titled Parquet Deformations, the Tiles, They Are a-Changin. Craig is an associate professor in the School of Computer Science at the University of Waterloo. He studies the application of computer graphics and mathematics to problems in art, architecture, and design, and is an expert on topics such as Islamic geometric patterns and computational applications of tiling theory. He also enjoys experimenting with computer-aided art and design using modern technology like 3D printing. In addition to his studies and instruction, he also serves as director of infrastructure for the School of Computer Science, which means he keeps the computers running. And he's also an associate editor and former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Mathematics and Arts, and member of the board of the Bridges organization, which oversees the annual Bridges Conference on Mathematics and Art. And he also maintains a personal blog. So with all that, you might say he's a pretty busy person. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Craig to talk about parquet deformations and tessellations.
Thanks very much, Fred. I'm delighted and honored to have been invited to this event to contribute a talk. I've watched some of the talks this week, and it's a great crowd of people to be included among. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we're not able to do this in person. The Gathering for Gardener has always been one of my favorite events to go to, and I hope we can do that again in the future. So what I'm going to talk about is an art form that has intrigued me, fascinated me for many years. I'll talk a little bit about its history and my connection, my history with it, and mainly build up to showcasing some of the designs that I've created by combining mathematics, computation, and some art. Before I get into that, I should give you a URL, and hopefully we can copy that into the chat. This particular URL, it won't be visible if you just go to isohedral.ca, but if you add the CoM 2021, you will get a page of extra links and animations. And in addition, every now and then I'll mention a paper or a link to more information. All of those links are collected on this page, so you can go there to get the links later. And that'll stay up forever, so you can go back later. To talk about the art form of parquet deformations, I need to start the history by talking about William Huff. So William Huff was a professor of design and architecture, basic design, who really pioneered the idea of parquet deformations. He taught for a long time in Ulm, at the School of Design there, worked for the architecture firm of Louis Kahn, great 20th century architect, later mostly divided his time between CMU and Buffalo. And in fact, I had the good fortune to visit him in Buffalo around 2009. Unfortunately, he just passed away just a couple of months ago in January at around, I guess he was around 93. But he, in his classes, in his instruction of basic design, he developed and enhanced this idea of parquet deformations as an exercise that he would give students. And a lot of these have been collected and digitized and retained, which is great. We have a large body of examples to work from. So this is kind of the precursor to parquet deformations. He would offer these drawing exercises in what he called pure parquets. And here you should understand parquet to be synonymous with tiling or tessellation. None of these words had really come to dominate the language at the time, and to some extent they still don't. And that's the word he used to refer what I would call a tiling. But it's nice, you know, historically we'll keep the words parquet deformation because the phrase has a bit of a mystique to it that I like. But you can see that he had these exercises that were both about developing your creative eye for design, for form, and also developing your hand for precise manual drafting, which was a good exercise for design students in the 20th century. And then this developed over time until you know, some of his students started producing drawings like this. So I have a booklet that he had put together of photocopies that was given to me by Dora Schatzschneider, who came upon it, who was given it sometime in the 80s probably. And this is the one that is marked in that booklet as the first Parquet deformation from around 1960. And so this kind of gives you a good sense of what we're talking about here. We have a tessellation of small shapes that gradually evolves in space. The shapes change slowly and gradually, and you can almost view this as telling a kind of story spatially, or maybe as a kind of animation. And I'll say more about that in a second. You might also see a connection to Escher here. That shouldn't be surprising at all. And the canonical example that I'll point to from Escher is Metamorphosis 2, which he created. This is a woodcut from around 1939. And again, you can see that Escher had this development, this sense of evolution. Certainly Huff was familiar with Escher's work and does say that Parquet deformations were inspired in part by Escher, which is interesting because one of the things you see in Parquet deformations is this tendency towards pure geometric abstraction, whereas Escher has these, he favored highly figurative designs, animal shapes, and Escher's desire to imbue life into his designs was almost a direct reaction to the abstract geometry of Islamic art that inspired him. So it's interesting that we get this flip-flopping back and forth. We can draw some comparisons between Escher's Metamorphoses and Huff's Parquet deformations. So here's just a couple of points of comparison that may be interesting. As I said, Escher favored figurative art with little characters. You could draw almost any shape, and if you put a little dot in the right place, it'll look like an eye, and the character will look a little bit like an animal form. Whereas Huff preferred abstract geometry. This is also a sensible decision if you're teaching in a design studio and you need an exercise that your students can produce in a reasonable amount of time, right? We can't all draw Escher-like woodcuts in a week. In fact, well, you saw, I mean, it took Escher 2 years to make Metamorphosis 2. Furthermore, Escher was very happy to use multiple interacting shapes. So birds and fish together, for example. Escher really liked this because it allowed him to create drama, tension, narrative structure to his pieces. So you could have angels and devils, optimists and pessimists. Whereas Huff treated this as an abstract exercise and preferred to have designs featuring a single shape that evolves. You have to be a little bit careful when you say single shape. It's not just one shape. There's lots of different shapes in Huff's, in these Parquet deformations, but maybe we say that at every given point in the design, there's an implied single shape that tiles the plane. And finally, this is going to be less important for this talk. Escher was happy to use tiles and their reflections, or you could say left and right-handed versions of the same shape, whereas Huff explicitly prohibited that in the exercise. And I think aesthetically, you could push back against that a little bit and say that there's an opportunity to make interesting designs with left and right-handed shapes. And occasionally one would sneak through Huff's studio, but we won't talk about that much today. So here are just a few additional scans of work created in Huff's studio. As far as I know, none of these were drawn by him. They're all created by his students over a period of something like 25 years, roughly 1960 to 1985, I think we have designs for. And we have a wide range of beautiful examples that we can be inspired from and try to understand and study. And it's created a bit of an industry of people who are interested in this topic. For my part, the place where I got interested in this topic is undoubtedly, and maybe for many of you, the essay that was published by Douglas Hofstadter, the article that appeared in Scientific American. So here's a very nice Martin Gardner connection. Hofstadter, for a couple of years, alternated months with Martin Gardner, publishing, well, mathematical games on the one hand and metamagical themas on the other hand. And Hofstadter collected his articles into the book, Metamagical Themas, which I think was published around 1989. But this essay, which I think was the last one he published in Scientific American, is from July 1983. And I read this a little bit after, probably in the early 90s, was immediately inspired by them, but I wasn't doing any kind of research at the time, so it just sat in my head for many years after that, something I took with me in my interest in mathematics and computer science. Then I went off and did a PhD in computer science and played around with tiling. So it was only natural to revisit this topic. And my study of this is to combine mathematics, computation, and art. So the idea would be parquet deformations are obviously tilings, and we have a modern mathematical theory that allows us to study the structure of tilings of the plane. So surely tiling theory is one tool that we can use to understand them, and that's exemplified by the book Tilings and Patterns by Grunbaum and Shepard. That is one of my very well-loved copies of the book that you see there. And we should be able to combine tiling theory with computation by reducing these mathematical facts down to computer algorithms to generate parquet deformations. That's the hope. I'm a computer scientist, so I know that I understand something when I can express it algorithmically, when I can write a piece of software that shows it to me. I'm not necessarily trying to automate the construction of parquet deformations, but I am trying to assist in the construction. So if you are an artist and you want to make one of these, what can the software do for you? Or looked at another way, can I substitute the craft of programming for what would have been the craft of manual drawing with a pen? And that's what I've done. That's my study of parquet deformations. The main tool I use in this study is a system of tilings of the plane called the isohedral tilings. And I'm not going to go into the mathematical details of how these work, but I will say they occupy a sweet spot between math, computation, and design. And what I mean by sweet spot is they are expressive enough to be useful for making the kinds of pictures you want. They certainly can express almost all the tilings that Escher drew, with one notable exception that is mathematically tangential to this, so I won't go into it. And they are also amenable to expression in computer software. They can be given a kind of symbolic notation that you can then turn into a computer program that manages the structure of an isohedral tiling for you. And to do that, I created a library called Tactile, which is, and I've actually made it available for free online if you want a library to help you play around with tilings. So it's available for C++ and JavaScript. There's a link on the web page I shared earlier. And I hope people will go off and enjoy playing with that. And a lot of the work you're about to see is tools that I've written using that library. Here's a bit of a metaphorical leap. I have done some work on animated tilings. I love the art form of animated mathematical GIFs. There's a lot of them online. I think Robert Fathauer mentioned Bees and Bombs, the alias of Dave White, yesterday. He posts a lot of beautiful animation loops on Twitter, and I've created a few of my own. And here is a looping animation of an isohedral tiling made with my software. And seeing the temporal animation hopefully provides us with an inspiration for how to do things spatially. So let me say a bit more about that. This is just a screenshot of the tool I wrote to create animated tilings. And the thing I want to point out is the section at the bottom here. The way traditional keyframe animation works is that the artist will draw a sparse set of keyframes separated in time, saying, make the story look like this here, and like this here. And then it's the computer's job to interpolate between those keyframes. This is a direct metaphor for traditional cell animation that you might find at Disney, where you have someone drawing what were called the keyframes, and then the in-betweeners would be responsible for interpolating by hand, creating all the intermediate frames. And computer animation, one of the goals of computer animation in an ideal world is to replace the manual in-betweening with computer interpolation or with mathematical interpolation. So we can use that to construct parquet deformations by kind of transposing keyframe animation into the spatial domain. So here's a visualization of that. One very quick example. Let's say you have a keyframe on the left consisting of a square and a keyframe on the right that looks like a little pinwheel. And we want to interpolate between these two shapes in the kind of tilted grid of squares you see underneath. What we might do is, let's say, put a dot at the center of every edge of that square grid. And we'll use that dot to give each edge of the tiling a kind of time code, a point in time that we can use as a reference to decide how interpolated that edge will be. How far along should it be from the square to the pinwheel? And the way we can visualize that is, let's drop a vertical line down from the center of that square to a kind of interpolation function, dx, that ranges from 0 to 1, so that the vertical lines at the left tell you that because you're near 0 in this ramp, you're going to look more like the square, and because you're near 1 on the right, you're going to look more like the pinwheel. And then I need some kind of blending function, some way to smoothly interpolate between the edge shapes of the square and those of the pinwheel. That's fine. There are many such algorithms that we can turn to from computer graphics, from mathematics. They're non-trivial, but we can write a variety of them. And all I have to do is, for each edge center, look up the corresponding amount of deformation and apply that shape in place. And in that way, I can construct a parquet deformation as a kind of spatial animation. That's the basic idea that I will use over and over from now on. And in my software, the tactile library for isohedral tilings, that manages the bookkeeping of defining the shapes of the tiles and their placement. And then the tool will interactively allow you to decide what tiles you want and where they should be. And then the computer will perform the interpolation for you. One way to obtain interesting parquet deformations is by experimenting with lots of different ways to blend between curves. And let me show you a couple of experiments that I've done. The first one is directly inspired by some of the artwork from Huff's studio. I call it grid-based evolution. Hopefully you can see here, in some sense, larger square tiles have been subdivided very finely into grids, and then the shapes evolve square by square by like modifying the outlines of the tiles a little bit at a time, evolving them from one side to the other. And it is possible to write a user interface that lets you define exactly such a sequence of jumps, hops, where a curve passes over one of the little mini grid squares to define a progression of shapes. And so here's an example of a parquet deformation I created using my software. I'm not going to show the user interface for this, but if there's time at the end, I can give demonstrations if people want. This is really fun to play with because it's very easy to dynamically see how the pattern changes as you modify the outlines of the shapes. And this is the same pattern twice with a close-up at the bottom. Some of these designs are a little bit delicate, and I want to make sure they come through clearly over Zoom. Here's one more. In this one, the design evolves from straight to very twisty and back to straight. Really no big deal. I think that's clear. You can change that d of x function to be a little mountain instead of just a ramp, and then it would look like this. Here's another experiment. There are many algorithms in computer science, in graphics and physical simulation that are about applying ideas from chemistry, physics, biology to perform simulations of organic looking shapes. Here's a particular paper from 2006. It was called Organic Labyrinths and Mazes, or something like that. And it's a way to evolve a shape using sort of a combination of Brownian motion, repulsion, and smoothing to get these organic coral looking forms. And you can apply this to the outline of a tile in a way with my library that maintains the tileability of the shape. So if I make a little organic bump on one side of the tile, maybe I make a corresponding bump on the other side so that the shape still tiles. And you get these interesting organic evolving parquet deformations. You may possibly have seen an example that looks like this if you have visited MoMath, the Museum of Mathematics in Midtown Manhattan, I think it is. These images were sent to me by the museum. Thank you, MoMath. They built at the entrance to the museum, in the windowsills and soffits around the main entrance, they have low relief bronze sculpture that I created using exactly that algorithm. Another technique that generates some interesting designs is fractals. So here's a simple iterated function system where you replace a straight line with a little squiggle, and if you repeat the replacement on every sub-squiggle, you can make bendier and bendier paths until in the limit you have a fractal. And with a little bit of extra work, you can evolve those fractal outlines smoothly and get a parquet deformation that moves from, well, in this case, straight lines to something very twisty on the other side. And here's just one more example of that. Now, all of the examples I just showed you were based on simple square grids because they were primarily about the evolution of the edges without regard for more general kinds of tilings. But of course, you can do interpolation over more general tilings and more general edge shapes. So there's a question mark here for Bridges 2008. I talked about this in a paper in Bridges 2008, but the screenshot you're seeing here is a complete rewrite of the application that I produced just in the last couple of months in preparation for this and something else I'll tell you about in a minute. So this tool is a very explicit spatial keyframe animation tool. The dots you might see here in the upper right sub-window are keyframes placed spatially. Each keyframe is a tile shape with edges in whatever shape you want. So the little bendy shape you see on the left is the keyframe associated with the right-hand point in this box. And the computer will do all of the shape interpolation to evolve from basically any tile to any other, as long as they have a sufficient amount of structure in common. And so you can make kind of arbitrary open-ended parquet deformations that evolve between different shapes. Again, this interface is really fun to play with, but in the interest of time, I'll skip that now and come back to it later if people want. There's another example with a close-up. Here's one more example. Here's one more kind of parquet deformation that I really enjoy thinking about. I call them topological transitions. Every tiling has a notion of a topology, which if you're a mathematician, you can think of it as being the graph structure of that tiling, the connectivity relationships between tiles and their neighbors. And for the isohedral tilings, the topologies are all expressed by these specific canonical tilings, the 11 lavas tilings. I believe Rob showed these as well yesterday in his discussion about tessellations. And what interests me is finding ways to construct parquet deformations that evolve from one of these to another, or pick your favorite one, pick your other favorite one, and can we get from A to B? And here are some examples of that. This is new work that is mostly unpublished. I have a fairly large portfolio of these that I've developed now. I'm hoping to write them up soon because there's a whole bunch of them and they're very interesting. I really like these parquet deformations in particular, or rather this class of parquet deformations, because they are geometrically very simple. They're elegant. They don't do a lot, but they somehow accomplish something surprising and difficult. They do something that, at the outset, you can't do that. You can't just jump from one topology to another, but there are devices like collapsing edges down that in fact allow you to do it. And I like these two examples because we have both of them go from hexagons to squares, but they do it in different ways, and you end up with horizontal and vertical squares on the one hand and diagonal squares on the other hand. Here are two that transition to the Cairo tiling, which is the organization of pentagons on the right, or you might perceive it as overlapping stretched hexagons in two directions. We go from hexagons to the Cairo tiling on the top and squares to the Cairo tiling on the bottom. Here's another one. This one goes from 30-degree isosceles triangles on the left to, well, I don't have a good name. I call them flowers or flower petals, but it's 33336 is the only official name that I know for them on the right. Now, those are just sort of ways to find direct connection back to the visual style of parquet deformations. Of course, there's a lot of additional things, a lot of new opportunities that we can explore with the benefit of computer algorithms in ways that probably would not have been feasible before. Certainly, I can't imagine one of Huff's students drawing a parquet deformation with a fractal boundary, at least only, maybe up to a certain point. And there are lots of other things we can explore too. One obvious thing that Huff did not want, but that we can do, is color. Color is trivial to manipulate in computer graphics. In fact, interpolating colors is much easier than interpolating shapes. So if you have tiles with defined colors on the left and right, you can just compute weighted averages of those colors everywhere in between. It is reasonable that Huff would not have asked his students to use color in the studio as well. First, because it further complicates the exercise, but also I would argue because Huff was so invested in color as its own topic, it wouldn't have been right to sort of layer it on top of what is already an exercise in form. When I visited Huff, I remember he had a collection of color studies by Joseph Albers, which kind of gives you a sense of how much he cared about color. Here's one more. This was a vague, this one I just put together like an hour and a half ago. I figured I already put this one online. I deserve a new one. So this was an attempt to go from like summer colors to winter colors and leaves to snowflakes, sort of. The closest I'll get to figurative in this talk. Another thing that some of Huff's students explored was a generalization to interpolation in more than one dimension. So here the shapes are evolving in every direction, vertically and horizontally. This one is, I only know it as 04.11. It's in the archives at Ulm, but I don't know who the artist is or what it's called. Here's one that does have a name and also featured in Hofstadter's article, I at the center. But you can see the same sort of phenomenon happening here, shapes evolving in multiple directions. Well, of course, there's no impediment to doing that as well on the computer. It's a little bit more complicated, but we can distribute our keyframes anywhere we want in space and then find a way to like interpolate gradually between all the nearby keyframes in some smart way, so you get a smooth two-dimensional interpolation everywhere. And I explored a couple of ways to do this. In computer science, we call this scattered data interpolation. And there are a few standard techniques to sort of, from the keyframes, determine a weight for every keyframe at every point in the plane, and then use those weights to take weighted sums of shapes to get kind of average shapes everywhere. And I won't go into it in any more detail than that. And here's an example that combines a few of the things I've just said. We have color, obviously, interpolation in two dimensions. And if you look carefully, you'll see that we have transitions between different tiling topologies. Hexagons on the left, kites on the right, rhombuses on the bottom, and isosceles triangles on the top. So those are four distinct lavas tilings kind of interpolating one into the other. One more extension that I want to talk about. Another dimension in which we can explore parquet deformations is layering back the animation in time as well as the animation in space that makes a parquet deformation what it is. So we can decouple the positions of the tiles from the interpolation function and move them around separately to get different visual effects. Here are a couple of very preliminary demonstrations of that. So in this example, the tiles are remaining absolutely fixed in space, and the interpolation function is like a sine wave sliding over them. So you can see that the Cairo tiles, the Cairo-ness of the tiles kind of slides over the squares to the left and keeps moving past it in waves. Now I find this a little bit funny to look at. It's visually strange to look at. But this one is visually, I find, much stranger. Here, the amount of Cairo-ness stays fixed in the plane, but the tiles are moving to the left. And your brain, my brain wants to see the tiles as having the same shape and as they move from right to left, but that's clearly not happening. We have squares on the left and Cairo on the right, and that never changes. This is very trippy, and I need to explore this more because it's a good source of strange kind of visual illusion. One more related example, this is moving. Here, the boundary between squares and Cairo tiles is rotating around the center of the image, and the tiles are staying fixed. And here, the boundary between square and Cairo is the midpoint of the image vertically, and the tiles are rotating around that. So as a tile completes a circle, it gets more Cairo-like as it goes to the right, and then more square-like as it comes back to the left. The last thing I want to mention is if you are interested in more information about parquet deformations, first of all, there's a link that is on the webpage but not in the talk, with my apologies. David Bailey has a lot of wonderful resources about tilings online on his webpage, including a big page about Parquet deformations. And I highly encourage you to go visit that. The other thing I want to mention is there's a lot of nice extensions in other ways, for example, to 3 dimensions. So these are some exercises that were done by students at TU Vienna under the supervision of Werner van Hooijdonk. And he had students explore what might be a 3-dimensional interpretation of Parquet deformations. And I mention this in particular, here are a few more. I mention this in particular because I am contributing a chapter on Parquet deformations to a forthcoming book edited by Werner with contributions from a bunch of people whose work I love. And you can see Douglas Hofstadter's mentioned there. His original essay from Scientific American will be included in this collection, and it should be published this fall. The title is Space Tessellations, Experimenting with Parquet Deformation. So I hope you'll keep an eye out for that. So that is all I want to say today about Parquet deformations. Here are the various ways to reach me. And if you go to Twitter, you will sometimes see me post more pictures like these. Thanks, and I'm happy to answer any questions. First question, have you thought about hyperbolic Parquet deformations? Have you thought about the relationship of these Parquet deformations to elliptic functions? Okay, so I've certainly thought about hyperbolic Parquet deformations, and there, again, it's the kind of thing, there is no mathematical impediment to constructing hyperbolic Parquet deformations. That's a natural idea. The tricky part about it, the thing that leaves me uncertain about how I would proceed is in a Euclidean Parquet deformation, there's a natural directionality because, of course, the affine Euclidean plane has translations, has nice translational symmetries. And so I can line up the evolution with the translations. I'm not quite as sure what I would want to do in the hyperbolic plane. Having said that, maybe the half plane or band model would be a good place to explore Parquet deformations. I'm not sure. I'm going to move on from there. Have you thought about the relationship? I have not thought about the relationship to elliptic functions. You might need to cue me and say exactly what kind of relationship you might see. I'd be curious to know. Thoughts on using the evolutionary method to move one figure to another, defining some fitness function or energy minimization? Yeah, I mean, you could try to view this as an optimization problem. Then you could almost take any collection of blobs over here to some other collection of blobs over here and find a middle ground. I've thought about it a little bit, but in a way, I guess I'm working more bottom up. I'm taking rigid mathematical rules and driving them as far as I can, rather than trying to develop an algorithm that can come in with anything and kind of figure out a best compromise. That said, there is a little bit of kind of energy minimization that you can see being involved here in terms of, like, if I have a tiling with vertices in one configuration over here and another configuration over here, maybe there's like you can use some kind of point registration method to line them up as closely as possible. And I've done a little bit with that. 3D, well, so that's a great 3D question mark. You saw some 3D interpretations of Parquet deformations from Werner's studio. It's obviously a very open-ended topic. If anything, I think there's too many things you can do. And so I'm not sure where to start. I mean, everything I did has a natural 3D analog. There are space-filling polyhedra that are the equivalent of 2D isohedral tilings, and you can evolve their faces however you want. But like, I'm not sure what I would want to do. I mean, low relief sculpture is, a kind of a cop-out answer, and you saw there's an example of that. The other fundamental issue with 3D, and just about anything, any paper I publish, a natural question is, what about 3D? Is I'm not sure how I experience it. I'm not sure how to interact with it. 2D ornamentation, I can just put on the wall and I can see the whole thing. 3D demands another way to interact with it. And who knows, maybe it's VR, maybe it's transparent walls. I'm not sure. Are any of these amazing images available to purchase as wallpapers? Well, so, okay, first of all, I have sold or traded a couple of these in the past with people off and on just for fun. Generally speaking, no, I am open to it. It can't be too high overhead because I have a 227% day job already, right? So but it's definitely something I could consider, under the right circumstances. I have made a ring with a Parquet deformation on it that is, I think, still available on Shapeways in metal printing, and a few people have those. Yeah, I mean, the natural question to ask these days is, are you going to put these up as NFTs so that I can pretend to own it? And I don't have a good answer to that yet. Don't ask me about NFTs. How many dimensions can you combine? Well, we did have, position, time, and color. How many other modalities can these things wiggle in? You can certainly vary line width, line style. Line width would be an interesting one to play with. You might be able to take a Parquet deformation and use the interpolation function to create a half-toned image. So you take a photo of your cat and you make twistier tiles where there's darker cat and less twisty tiles where there's lighter cat. That would be something fun to play with. That's actually not too hard to do, but I haven't done it in this context. Are AI algorithm designs at all related or similar? AI algorithm, I'm not sure what, if you mean like a neural style transfer, like images, hallucinatory images created by deep learning. No, there's not really a connection to those. Those are fantastic images, and you should always ask the question: if I took all these Parquet deformations and stuck them into a deep neural network, would it understand and construct new hallucinations of Parquet deformations? I am interested in the field of neural art, although I haven't done a lot of it myself. What was the one Escher thing that isohedral tilings don't work for? I think Doris Schatzschneider is here in the audience. So this is straight out of her book, Visions of Symmetry, which is about Escher's practice of regular divisions of the plane. Escher filled notebooks with something like 137 drawings of tiling. So these were sketches, pencil and pen lines filled in with watercolor, colored pencil, very quick. And then he later adapted a lot of those to his prints. And they're all isohedral, or like 2 isohedral, 3 isohedral, where there are multiple different shapes, with the sole exception of the last one, number 137, which he sometimes called his ghosts, and which was shown to him by, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger Penrose, showed him an example of a tile that had been designed not to be isohedral and gave it to him as a kind of puzzle. And when he figured it out, he was so delighted that, of course, he had to turn it into a little critter, which he did. I've always loved Parquet deformations. Considering the ease of creating animations now, it seems to me like Parquet deformations have been made obsolete. A looping animation is that's a great question. So, if it's so easy to make and share animations now, do we still even need Parquet deformations? I would argue strongly that Parquet deformations offer a visual aesthetic that is distinct from a temporally animated tiling. Now, this is clearly not a mathematical statement. It is a visual art statement. But, even if I can perfect the construction of temporal animations of tilings, I will always go back and make these long, thin Parquet deformations. I find them fascinating. To me, there's part of what makes them special is there's an extra mathematical constraint here that the tiles have to evolve while still all fitting together. So that's actually harder to do than to animate a tiling temporally. And if you're not a mathematician, maybe that harder to do is not rigorously clear, but hopefully in some sense it's still priming your visual intuition and giving you a puzzle, something, an additional nugget to try to understand. And I will defend that point of view. I think they are their own independent art forms, separate from temporal animations. Perhaps you could use your system as the basis of a suite of puzzles where you are seeking to transform various figures efficiently, or a competitive game where they are controlling various features. Well, that's interesting. I mean, it would be interesting to have like player A on one side manipulating a tile shape, player B on the other side manipulating a tile shape, and trying to collaboratively invent some interesting shape in the middle. I don't know exactly how I would turn this into a puzzle or a game. I am very interested in puzzles and games based on tiling theory. I just haven't tried to do it with this. some of you may have seen, there's a beautiful geometric puzzle game available for mobile platforms based on indirectly on Islamic art, and it's really visually nice. And that person is working on another game that is also based on geometry and puzzles. So you got to keep an eye out for those. But in one of your last slides, I see the far left part as simple columns of squares and the right part as two graphene layers being separated. You might play with that. Yeah, that's cool. So you're right that the Cairo tiling, because it looks like two overlapping hex meshes at right angles, it kind of does look like two graphene layers. That's interesting. And you could play with that with one layer on the left and two layers on the right. That's a great idea. One way to do that might be with some suitable coloring that tries to elicit that sense of one layer on the left, maybe everything's the same color, and two layers on the right through two colors. I'm not sure exactly how to do that. I mean, maybe you would even tilt the design in 3D and have the two layers of graphene come away from each other. That could be very nice as well. And these can easily be, that's not exactly a 3D parquet deformation in the way that Ed suggested, but you can do some interesting things even sort of within a slab, like by varying the height. Do you know of any examples with multiple different tiles? I'm thinking of multiple different tiles. Oh, I see. So just two different shapes completely. Well, there's nothing in my system that prevents you from having multiple different tile shapes. It's not something I talked about much. You have seen, I said the rule at the start of the talk that Huff, he made his students use a single shape at a time. But you can definitely make parquet deformations with multiple tile shapes. And yeah, now that I think about it, I am aware of some examples. I've created some. In particular, I've experimented combining parquet deformations with Islamic art. So creating Islamic star tessellations that evolve over space. If you look on my academic homepage, that is in a paper from 2004 or 2005 called Islamic Star Patterns from Polygons in Contact, I think. So you will see some Islamic, or if you do a web search on Islamic parquet deformation, you'll find them. And I believe Jay Bonner has experimented with those as well. So that's a very clear example where there are multiple distinct tile shapes. As for polyforms, I'm less sure, but it's a very natural idea and it'd be worth playing with. What other brain-breaking in-time transformations have you constructed? If you scroll back a little bit on my Twitter feed, you will see a couple of other things I experimented with parquet deformations. So before I made the Cairo one, I did one that's more based on hexagonal tilings and triangles. So, but in a way, I think I'm just really starting to play around with those. They're a little bit harder to, I don't have a program that lets me author them, 10 an hour the way I do for some of the other static stuff. And I've also experimented a lot with parquet deformations, with animated isohedral tilings. So there's no parquet element to them, but I'm still looking for tilings that form closed loops, what Hofstadter might have called a strange loop, a loop that comes back to its starting point in a non-obvious way. And again, some of those are on Twitter. Some of those are in my Bridges 2019 paper, Animated Isohedral Tilings. Parquet hash transform. So I guess we would want a non-tiling shape which is surrounded by layers of copies of itself and which evolves in some direction. Yeah, that is definitely possible. I'm not sure what exactly I would do with that. Again, I would be stymied by the fact that there's no obvious direction for the evolution to take place in. That's not a reason why you can't do it. It's just saying I'm looking for the right visual reason, the right artistic statement to make with that before I would experiment with it. But of course it's a great idea. Human thoughts and concepts go through a similar transformation, changing society throughout history. Can we apply our understanding of this phenomenon of transformation to making the world better? Would that it were that simple. I don't think I can create a parquet deformation that is so beautiful and so compelling that it changes people's minds about the world. I wish that were true. So yeah, can we apply our understanding of this phenomenon of transformation to making the world better, achieving world peace? Well, that is an excellent goal, and I fully support it, obviously. If anything, the expression of transformation that is found in Parquet deformations reflects a deeper expression of transformation that would be sort of an intellectual cousin of the quest to make the world better. But I don't think anything I've done can help us understand how to do that. If I did know how, I would be doing it. Can you turn the word parquet into the word deformation? Oh, well, that's a fantastic idea. Yes, I guess. I mean, there are lots of ways I could do that if I really wanted to, right? Just move the pixels around or something. Can I do it in a parquet deformation? I don't see an obvious way to do that. Clearly, the mathematical art form where people experiment with turning one word into another is ambigrams. So I would have the word parquet, which becomes deformation when turned upside down. It's a fantastic topic. It's not something I've studied a great deal. You would have to ask Scott Kim to draw that for you, I suspect. Chemistry. I agree. Okay, use this to construct interfaces between different molecular structures. This is a major difficulty. Excellent topic. I love the interface between tiling theory, or even just discrete geometry, and chemistry. And I've been involved in a couple of projects in that domain. But very, very much, I bring the computer science to the chemists. I do not speak chemistry. So I do not have the expertise to know whether, there's something that I can contribute there, unfortunately. But I love when the opportunity arises to contribute to other STEM fields, and I try to get involved. Stacking the evolving tiling patterns in 3D would make an interesting shape. Yeah, so you can turn this into a kind of fluid space-time 3D model where the individual slices represent different time periods. And we've seen in the math art world some beautiful examples of this. So Henry Sagerman had a really nice paper on creating stacked generations of fractals into smooth 3D surfaces. That was really nice. In fact, one of the other chapters in the Parquet book by one of the other contributors is about imagining a Parquet deformation as a 3D volume through which you slice out the surface containing the design you want. So there are definitely people thinking about it that way. Do we find Parquet deformations in nature? Well, we certainly find irregular tilings in nature, or tilings that are always changing. I'm not sure whether we find tilings that change with a sense of directionality, with consistent evolution in one direction. I'm not sure where I would look for that. I'd be very curious to know if someone can think of where you'd find something like that. Ed brings up parkour. Well, that's fantastic. I just did my parkour for the day. There's a parking lot near my house that has a metal railing along one side, and every day when I go out for my walk, I walk along the railing, try to make sure I keep my exercise up during these unprecedented times. So we call that parkour. Parkour light. Parkour is acrobatics back and forth between walls, such as getting to the street from the roof. A descending back and forth parquet would be parquet parkour. Thank you very much. Parkour parquet. And if it's butter substitute, then it can be a parquet parquet. But that's a bit of an old joke, I think.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to close it up. I thank everybody for your participation, for hanging in and enjoying the talk, and been a lot of fun.
Yep. Been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.